The wind in the north was always cold, but that night it felt different. Robb Stark stood outside his tent, looking at the dark sky. The war had already taken too much from him. His father, Ned Stark, was dead, killed in King's Landing because he trusted the wrong people. But Robb was not just a grieving son anymore. He had grown. People still called him the young wolf, but they didn't see what was changing inside him. He carried his father's honor in his heart, but now he also carried his mother's sharp mind. Catelyn Stark had always seen danger before it came, and Robb had started to listen more carefully. The war against the Lannisters was far from over. Tywin Lannister was not a fool. He was patient, dangerous. He didn't fight only with swords. He fought with plans. Robb had won many battles. He had beaten Jaime Lannister. He had outsmarted powerful armies. But winning battles was not the same as winning the war. Inside his tent, his mother was waiting. "You look troubled," Catelyn said softly. Robb sat down across from her. "Walder Frey," he said. "He smiles too much." Catelyn's eyes became serious. "Yes, and men who smile too much are often hiding something." Robb nodded. In another world, maybe he would have ignored that feeling. Maybe he would have trusted the promise of safe passage and forgiveness. But not now. He had made a mistake before. He had broken his promise to marry one of Walder Frey's daughters. Instead, he married Talissa for love. It was a beautiful thing. But in war, love could be dangerous. "I will apologize to Lord Frey," Robb said, "but I will not trust him." Catelyn looked at her son with pride. He sounded like Ned, calm and honest. But there was something else in him now. Caution. That same night, Robb called his most loyal men, Grey Wind resting at his feet. "We go to the twins," Robb said, "but we go prepared." Roose Bolton stood quietly in the corner. His face was hard to read, too quiet, too still. Robb noticed. He had started noticing everything. "Half our men will remain outside the castle walls," Robb continued, "armed, ready. Some of the lords looked confused. "But, Your Grace," one said, "it is a wedding feast. We are guests." Robb's eyes became cold like northern ice. In war, trust is earned, and Walder Frey has not earned mine. Silence filled the tent. Catelyn watched carefully. She knew something was different in her son. He was no longer fighting only with courage. He was thinking like a true king. Days later, they arrived at the twins. The castle looked peaceful. Torches burned warmly. Music could be heard from inside. It looked like celebration. But Robb saw the archers on the walls. Too many. Grey Wind growled softly. Catelyn leaned closer to her son. "You see it too?" "Yes," Robb whispered. Before entering, Robb gave secret orders. His uncle Ednor Tully would attend the wedding, but Robb would control the guards. His soldiers would not drink too much. They would rotate shifts. Hidden signals were agreed upon. Inside the hall, Walder Frey welcomed them with fake warmth. "King in the north," Frey said loudly. "You honor my house." Frey said loudly. "You honor my house." Robb bowed slightly. "And I thank you for your forgiveness." Music started. Wine flowed. People laughed. But Robb did not drink much. He watched. Roose Bolton spoke quietly with Frey's men. Too quietly. Catelyn's hand tightened around her cup. Then Robb heard it. The sound. A door closing heavily. Music suddenly changed. The tune felt wrong. Robb stood slowly. His voice was calm but strong. "Mother." "Now." Catelyn dropped her cup on the floor. Loudly. Catelyn dropped her cup on the floor loudly. Outside the hall, Stark soldiers blocked the exits. Inside, Robb pulled his sword before the first crossbow bolt could fly. Chaos exploded. But this time, the North was ready. Grey Wind broke free from his cage outside, tearing through Frey guards like a storm. Arrows flew, but Stark's shields were raised. Roose Bolton reached for his blade, but Robb's eyes were already on him. "Did you think I would not see it?" Robb said coldly. Bolton froze. The Red Wedding had begun, but it was not the massacre Walder Frey planned. It was a trap reversed. And this time, the wolf had teeth. The hall was no longer filled with music. It was filled with screams. Tables flipped. Wine spilled across the floor like blood. Frey's soldiers rushed forward, but they were confused. This was not how it was supposed to happen. The Starks were meant to be drunk, unarmed, easy to kill. Instead, they were standing, ready. Robb moved fast, faster than most expected. His sword flashed in the torchlight as he cut down the first man who rushed him. He didn't hesitate. Not like before. Not like the boy who once believed every man had honor. Now he understood something his father had tried to teach him. When the time for justice comes, you do not wait. Across the hall, crossbows fired from the balcony. But Stark's shields locked together like a wall of iron. The first wave of bolts struck wood and metal instead of flesh. Catelyn did not scream. She did not panic. She moved beside her son, her eyes sharp, searching for the true threat. And she saw him. Roose Bolton. He had not drawn his sword to defend Robb. He had not drawn his sword to defend Robb. He had drawn it carefully, slowly, watching which side would win. Catelyn's voice cut through the chaos. "Robb, behind you." Bolton stepped forward, pretending loyalty. "Your Grace, allow me." Robb turned, sword already raised. Their eyes met. In Bolton's pale stare, Robb saw it clearly now. Not fear, not loyalty, calculation. "You wrote to Tywin Lannister," Robb said quietly, even as men fought around them. Bolton's face did not change. "Careful, my king. Accusations in times like this can be deadly." Robb stepped closer. "I learned something from my father. Honor matters. But I also learned something from my mother." He glanced briefly at Catelyn. "Trust no man who hides his eyes." Bolton moved suddenly, striking fast. But Robb had been waiting. Steel clashed against steel. The sound rang sharp and loud. Bolton was older, experienced, but Robb was young, strong, and burning with purpose. They circled each other as chaos roared around them. "You are still a boy," Bolton whispered. "Playing king." Robb attacked hard, forcing Bolton back. "No," he said coldly. "I am the king in the north." Bolton tried one last quick strike, aiming low. Robb twisted aside, just like his father once showed him in Winterfell's yard. In one clean movement, Robb drove his blade forward. Bolton gasped. Shock finally appeared in his pale eyes. He fell without another word. Around them, the fight was turning. Outside, the Stark army had stormed the gates when they heard the signal. Frey guards were overwhelmed. The twins were no longer safe. Walder Frey was trying to escape. The old man was being dragged through a side door by two of his sons, when Grey Wind burst into the corridor like a beast of legend. The direwolf leaped, tearing one man down instantly. The other dropped his weapon in terror. Frey stumbled back, falling to the floor. Robb stepped into the corridor moments later, sword stained red. Walder Frey looked small now, smaller than his cruelty. "You broke guest right," Robb said calmly. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Frey tried to speak. "Mercy, your grace." "Mercy?" Robb's eyes were like frozen rivers. "You plan to slaughter my family under your roof." Catelyn walked up beside her son. Her face held pain, but also strength. "The North remembers," she said softly. Robb looked down at the old man. Killing him would be easy. It would feel good. Quick revenge. But Ned Stark's voice echoed in his mind. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Robb raised his blade. Wald of Frey, he declared, for treason, for breaking sacred law, for conspiring with our enemies, I sentence you to death. He did not rush it. He did not look away. The sword fell clean. Silence followed. The fighting slowly stopped as Frey men surrendered. Some ran. Some threw down their weapons. The Red Wedding had failed. Outside, the Stark banners still flew high, but Robb knew something important. This was not the end. If Bolton had betrayed him, then Tywin Lannister was behind it. This was bigger than one house, bigger than one castle. Catelyn placed a hand on his arm. You saved us. Robb shook his head slightly. No, we survived. But the lions will roar louder now. He looked toward the south, where King's Landing stood far beyond the rivers and hills. They thought I was my father, Robb said quietly. They thought I would fight with honor alone. His grip tightened on his sword. They are about to learn I am my mother's son as well. The North had not fallen. The wolf had seen the trap. And now, the war would change. The fires at the Twins burned through the night. Bodies were carried out. Prisoners were tied. The banners of House Frey were torn down and replaced with the dire wolf of Stark. The river below the castle ran dark, reflecting the flames like a warning to the world. Robb Stark stood on the balcony where the musicians had once played, the same place where crossbows were meant to kill him. Now, it belonged to him. The cold wind touched his face, but his thoughts were hotter than fire. Roose Bolton's betrayal confirmed something terrible. Tywin Lannister was not just fighting on the battlefield. He was breaking the North from the inside. Catelyn joined him quietly. You are thinking about what comes next. Yes, Robb said. Tywin lost his secret weapon tonight, and that makes him more dangerous, she replied. Robb nodded. His father would have marched south with pride, challenged the lions openly. But Robb had learned something new. Tywin Lannister did not fight fair, so neither would he. The next morning, Robb gathered his lords inside the great hall of the Twins. The mood was different now. They had survived death. That changes men. Great John Umber slammed his fist on the table. We should march straight to Casterly Rock and burn it to the ground. Many cheered. But Robb remained calm. No, he said. The hall quieted. We do not give Tywin what he expects. Edmure Tully frowned. Then what do we do? Robb stepped forward slowly. We make him afraid. Some of the men exchanged confused looks. Robb continued. Tywin believes he controls the game. He believes we react to him. That ends now. Catelyn watched his son carefully. He was not just speaking like a warrior anymore. He was speaking like a ruler. We will not march south, Robb said. Not yet. Instead, we split our forces. That caused whispers. Half will return north, Robb explained. Stubthan Moatcailin. Secure Winterfell. Secure Winterfell. At the name Winterfell, his chest tightened slightly. He still did not know the full truth about what had happened there. Rumors were dark. Theon Greyjoy's betrayal still burned like poison. The other half, Robb continued, will move through the Riverlands. Fast, quiet. We hit Lannister supply lines. We burn their food, destroy their roads. Guerrilla war, Blackfish muttered with approval. Destroy their roads. Guerrilla war, Black nodded. We bleed them slowly. One of the older lords spoke carefully. And what of the Iron Throne? Robb's eyes hardened. The Iron Throne can wait. First, we break Tywin. Far away in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister sat at the head of the small council table. A letter lay open in front of him. His face did not show emotion. It never did, but his fingers tapped once against the wood. Walder Frey, dead. Roose Bolton, dead. The Red Wedding, failed. Cersei paced the room. How could this happen? Frey promised. Tywin raised a hand. Silence. Robb Stark has changed, Tywin said calmly. Tyrion leaned back slightly. Perhaps we underestimated the boy. Tywin's eyes turned cold. He's no longer a boy. For the first time, Tywin felt something rare. Uncertainty. Back at the twins, Robb walked alone through the quiet corridors. Grey Wind followed closely. He stopped in a small chamber where Walder Frey's maps were spread across a table. Letters too. Robb began reading. One letter caught his eye. The seal of the Iron Throne. He broke it open. Inside were instructions from Tywin. Promises of titles, lands, power. If the Starks were destroyed, Robb's jaw tightened. So this was never just about insult, he whispered. This was planned carefully. But as he read further, he noticed something else. Tywin had been negotiating with another house as well. House Tyrell. Robb leaned back slowly. If the Lannisters were building alliances in the south, then he needed one too. Catelyn entered quietly. What did you find? Robb handed her the letter. Her eyes moved quickly across the words. The Reach, she said softly. If Tywin joins fully with the Tyrells, their armies combined would be massive. Yes, Robb replied, which means we cannot fight alone anymore. Catelyn studied him. You are thinking of an alliance. Mob nodded slowly. The North has honor, but honor does not fill empty stomachs or protect every village. He walked toward the window. What if we speak to Stannis Baratheon? Catelyn looked surprised. He claims the throne, Robb continued. He hates the Lannisters more than we do, and he has a fleet. You would bend the knee? Catelyn asked carefully. Robb was silent for a long moment. Then he said something Ned Stark might never have said. If it protects the North, I would consider it. The wind outside howled like a wolf, answering its king. Robb Stark was no longer reacting to the war. He was shaping it. Tywin had tried to end him with betrayal. Now Robb would answer with strategy. And somewhere in the south, the lions were beginning to realize the wolf was not cornered. The wolf was hunting. The raven left the twins before sunrise. Its black wings cut through the cold morning sky, carrying Robb Stark's message south. Not a threat, not a surrender, an offer. Inside the letter were careful words, written by Robb himself. He did not beg. He did not bow fully. But he was willing to talk. To Stannis Baratheon. Days later, on the cold shores of Dragonstone, Stannis stood staring at the narrow sea when the letter was placed in his hand. He read it once. Then again. Davos Seaworth watched quietly. What does the young wolf want? Stannis' jaw tightened. He wants an alliance. Davos raised an eyebrow. That's not something I expected. Nor I, Stannis replied. The letter was simple. Robb acknowledged Stannis as the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms. In return, the North would remain largely independent. The old ways respected. The Starks would keep Winterfell and rule the North as wardens, not rebels. And together they would crush the Lannisters. Stannis folded the letter slowly. The boy learns quickly. Back at the twins, Robb was not waging peacefully. His army had already split. Small Stark forces were striking Lannister supply camps at night. Food wagons burned. Gold shipments vanished. Messengers disappeared on lonely roads. Tywin Lannister began receiving reports every day. Lost grain, dead soldiers, destroyed bridges. Tywin studied the maps in his chambers in King's Landing. The attacks were not random. They were precise. Clean. Robb was cutting his legs out from under him. Cersei stormed into the room one evening. This cannot continue. Our armies are stretched thin. The Tyrells demand more protection for their lands. Tywin did not look at her, because they are afraid. Of what? She snapped. Tywin finally turned his cold eyes toward her. Of Robb Stark. Meanwhile, in the Riverlands, Robb rode at the front of a small force. No large banners, no loud war songs. Speed was their weapon now. They arrived at a hidden Lannister camp near Harrenhal just before midnight. Robb raised his hand. Silent. Men moved like shadows. Within minutes, tents were in flames. Guards were cut down before they could shout warnings. Horses were freed, sent running into the dark. Robb dismounted and walked calmly through the burning camp. He did not smile. This was not joy. This was survival. Suddenly, a captured Lannister knight was dragged before him. "You fight like cowards," the knight spat. Hiding in darkness, Robb crouched slightly so they were eye to eye. "My father fought honorably," Robb said quietly, "and your king cut off his head." The knight had no answer. Robb stood again. "Send him back," he ordered his men. The soldiers looked confused. "Your Grace, cut him loose at dawn. Let him ride to King's Landing." Robb's eyes were calm but sharp. Let him tell Tywin what he saw. The message was clear. The wolf could strike anywhere. Days later, at Dragonstone, Stannis made his decision. "The North will have its independence in practice," he declared. "But I will be king." Davos smiled faintly. A wise choice. Ships began preparing. An alliance was forming. But not everyone in the north was pleased. At Riverrun, some northern lords whispered among themselves. "Bend the knee," one muttered. "After all this, he risks Stark pride," another said. Catelyn heard the whispers. That night, she approached Robb privately. "They question you," she said gently. Robb stared into the fire. "I know. Are you certain about this path?" He was silent for a long moment. "When father died," Robb said slowly, "I wanted revenge. Only revenge. Only revenge. But revenge alone would have killed us." He looked up at his mother. "If I must bend slightly so the North does not break, then I will." Catelyn saw it clearly now. He had Ned's honor, but he also had her patience. Suddenly, hoofbeats thundered outside. A rider arrived, breathless. "Your Grace! News from the North!" Robb's heart tightened. "Speak." "Winterfell. It still stands." Relief flooded him for a brief second. But the rider continued. "However, the Ironborn are gathering again, and there are rumors beyond the wall. Wildlings moving south in large numbers." The room fell silent. The war in the south, the threat in the north, and winter slowly approaching. Robb stood tall. "Then we fight on two fronts," he said firmly. Catelyn stepped closer. "That is dangerous." Robb nodded. So was doing nothing. He walked to the map table again, studying the north. Kievi. He walked to the map table again, studying the north, carefully. The true enemy might not be the lions. It might be the cold itself. And Robb Stark understood something deeply now. If he was to protect his people, he would need more than swords and alliances. He would need vision, because while the South played its Game of Thrones, winter was coming, and this time the wolf would be ready. The cold in the north felt sharper than before, like the land itself was warning them. Robb rode hard toward Moat Cailin with a selected group of trusted men. He had sent commands ahead: fortify the walls, gather food, call every loyal banner. If winter was truly coming, they could not be weak. As they rode, Robb's thoughts were heavy. The Lannisters in the south, Stannis preparing his fleet, Ironborn gathering on the western shores, and now wildlings marching from beyond the wall. It felt like the whole world was closing in. When they reached Moat Cailin, the air smelled of damp stone and cold mud. The ancient fortress stood strong, blocking the neck, like a gate to the north. Inside the walls, Robb met with Mage Mormont and Gale Bart Glover. "The Ironborn are restless," Mage said bluntly. "They think you are too busy fighting lions." Robb's jaw tightened. "Let them think that." "And the wildling?" Gale Bart asked. Robb paused. "Send word to the Night's Watch," he said. "I want truth, not rumors." That night, as he stood on the high tower, Grey Wind beside him, a strange feeling settled in his chest. Not fear, something deeper. Responsibility. Ned Stark had always carried that weight. Now, Robb understood it fully. Every decision meant life or death for thousands. The next morning, a black-cloaked rider arrived from Castle Black. His face was tired, his eyes serious. "The wildlings are not just raiding," the ranger said. "They are fleeing." "Fleeing what?" Robb asked. The ranger hesitated. "Something worse." Silence filled the room. "White walkers," the ranger whispered. Some of the northern lords shifted uncomfortably. Old stories, children's tales. But Robb did not laugh. His father never mocked the old ways. "How many?" Robb asked calmly. "We don't know. But villages beyond the wall are empty. And the dead, they don't stay dead." A chill ran through the chamber. Robb turned slowly to his commanders. If this is true, then the war in the south means nothing. That evening, Robb called a private meeting with Catelyn. "The realm fights over a chair made of swords," he said quietly, "while death walks in the snow." Catelyn studied him. "You believe the threat is real?" "Yes." "And what will you do?" Robb looked at the map of Westeros. "I will meet with Stannis myself." Catelyn frowned slightly. "That is risky." "So is waiting," Robb replied. Days later, on a cold and windy shore near White Harbor, ships appeared on the horizon. Stannis Baratheon's fleet. The meeting was tense. Stannis stood tall, rigid as iron. Robb stood facing him, young but unshaken. "You bend the knee?" Stannis asked directly. Robb did not kneel immediately. "I recognize your claim," Robb said carefully, "but my people will not be ruled like the South." Stannis stared at him for a long moment. "You are bold. I am honest." Davos stepped forward gently. "Perhaps both sides need each other more than they admit." Robb nodded. "The Lannisters weaken every day. But there is a greater enemy." Stannis' expression hardened. "You speak of the darkness beyond the wall. You believe it too," Robb said. Stannis did not deny it. "I have seen signs," Stannis admitted. "The Lord of Light shows warnings in flame." Robb did not argue about gods. Instead, he stepped closer. "Then fight with me. Help me secure the north. When winter comes fully, the Iron Throne will mean nothing if the dead march south." For the first time, Stannis looked at Robb, not as a rebel, but as a king. "You would defend the realm," Stannis said quietly. "I would defend my home," Robb answered. There was a difference, but also respect. Finally, Robb knelt on one knee. "I will support your claim as King of the Seven Kingdoms." The wind howled around them. Stannis stepped forward. "And I name you Warden of the North. You will rule it as long as you are loyal." Robb stood again. And the alliance was sealed. But far away in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister received terrible news. "Stannis has joined forces with the Stark boy," the messenger said nervously. Tywin's face remained calm, but his eyes darkened. "Then we prepare for siege," he said coldly. Meanwhile, back at Castle Black, the first real attack came. A group of wildlings rushed the wall not to conquer, but to beg entry. Behind them, in the distant snow, dark shapes moved, watching, waiting, waiting. And for the first time in centuries, the true war was beginning. Robb Stark had won against betrayal, He had outsmarted lions. He had made alliances with kings. But now he would face something no southern lord could understand. Not politics, not pride, but death itself. And winter was no longer just coming. It had arrived. The wall looked taller than ever when Robb Stark first saw it again. Ice stretched into the sky like a frozen mountain, shining pale blue under the weak winter sun. The wind here was different. It did not just feel cold. It felt alive. Robb rode through the gates of Castle Black with Stannis' soldiers behind him. Black cloaks of the Night's Watch lined the yard, watching carefully. They were tired men, thin, hard, but their eyes held something Robb respected. They had seen the truth. Jon Snow stood waiting near the steps. For a moment, the world felt smaller. Robb dismounted quickly. They stared at each other, two sons of Ned Stark, shaped by war in different ways. Then Robb stepped forward and pulled Jon into a tight embrace. "I thought you were dead," Robb said quietly. Jon gave a small, tired smile. "I get that a lot, but the warmth did not last long." "Is it true?" Robb asked. "The White Walkers?" Jon's face became serious again. "Yes, they gathered inside the Lord Commander's chambers. Stannis, Davos, Jon, Robb, and a few trusted men." Jon placed a rough map of the lands beyond the wall on the table. "They're moving south slowly," Jon explained. "They raise the dead as they go. Every village becomes part of their army." Stannis crossed his arms. "How many?" "We don't know," Jon admitted. "But more every day." Robb looked at the map carefully. "Then we cannot wait behind the wall," he said. Jon frowned slightly. "You want to go beyond it?" "Yes." Jon frowned slightly. "You want to go beyond it?" "Yes." The room fell silent. Stannis studied him. "That would be dangerous." Robb met his eyes. "If we wait, they grow stronger. If we strike first, maybe we slow them." Jon stepped closer to the map. "There's a place called Hardhome. Thousands of wildlings gathered there. If the White Walkers reach them, they gain thousands more soldiers." Robb finished. Stannis nodded slowly. "Then Hardhome becomes our first battlefield." Outside, wildlings who had been allowed through the gates were huddled near fires. Women, children, old men, scared. Robb walked among them quietly. A small wildling boy stared at him. "Are you a crow?" the boy asked. Robb shook his head. "No, I'm a wolf." The boy looked confused. Robb crouched down. "We are going to fight for you." The boy didn't smile, but he didn't look afraid anymore either. That night, Robb stood alone at the top of the wall with Jon. "You've changed," Jon said. "So have you," Robb replied. Jon looked north into the endless white land. "This isn't like fighting Lannisters." "I know. You can't outsmart death." Robb was quiet for a moment. "Maybe not," he said. "But we can't outfight it." Jon studied his brother. He saw Ned in him, the same calm strength. But there was something else now. The same calm strength. But there was something else now. "When do we leave?" Jon asked. "At dawn." The next morning, ships sailed from Eastwatch by the sea toward Hardhome. Stannis' fleet cut through dark waters while northern soldiers and wildling warriors stood side by side on deck. It felt strange. Former enemies now fighting together. Robb stood at the front of the ship, wind whipping through his hair. Grey wind paced behind him restlessly. Hardhome came into view by sunset. Smoke rose from the shoreline. Too much smoke. Jon's face went pale. "We're too late." As ships landed, the sound reached them first. Screams, steel clashing, and something else. A sound like ice cracking. Robb jumped onto the shore, sword drawn. The battlefield was chaos. Wildlings were fighting desperately against pale figures with blue eyes. white walkers, and behind them, an army of the dead. Hundreds, maybe thousands, form lines. Robb shouted, "Shields together!" Northern soldiers locked shields as whites rushed forward mindlessly. The first wave hit hard. The dead did not feel pain. They did not fear. Robb cut one down, but it kept crawling until Jon smashed its skull with dragon glass. "Dragon glass! Dragon glass!" Jon yelled. "It kills them!" Stannis' men began using obsidian weapons quickly, but then the air grew colder, and the fighting slowed. He appeared, a tall figure on a dead horse, ice crown, blue eyes burning. The Night King. Even from a distance, Robb felt it. Pure death. The Night King raised his hand slowly, and every fallen body on the battlefield began to rise. Even some northern soldiers, even wildlings who had just died seconds before. The army doubled instantly. Men around Robb hesitated. Fears spread like poison. Jon stepped beside him. "We can't win this." Robb's mind raced. Retreat meant survival, but also leaving thousands behind. Stay too long and they would all die. He made the hardest choice of his life. "Fall back to the ships." Robb roared, "Protect the living." Some screamed in anger, but Robb grabbed a fallen child and carried him toward the boats himself. Grey wind tore through whites, clearing a path. The retreat was brutal. Men were dragged into icy waters. Ships were overloaded. As Robb reached the final boat, he turned once more toward the shore. The Night King stood watching him, silent, unmoving. And then he raised his hand again. The entire shoreline of dead bodies stood up together, an unstoppable army. Robb stared back, not with fear, but with promise. "This isn't over," he whispered. The ships pulled away into the dark sea. Hardhome burned behind them. Then the war for the living had truly begun. The sea was silent on the way back. No one spoke much. The ships were heavy with the living, but heavier with loss. Men sat quietly, staring at nothing. Some held wounds. Some held the hands of children who had lost their parents at Hardhome. Robb stood at the edge of the ship, looking back at the fading smoke on the horizon. They had not won, but they had survived. Jon walked beside him. His face looked older now, harder. "We slowed them," Jon said quietly. "For how long?" Robb asked. Jon did not answer. When they returned to Castle Black, the mood was dark. News spread quickly. The army of the dead was real. The Night King was real. Fear moved through the castle like cold wind. Stannis gathered his commanders inside the hall. "We cannot defeat that army with numbers alone," Stannis said firmly. "We need more men." "And more dragon-glass," Davos added. Samwell Tarly stepped forward nervously. "There's a mountain of dragonglass on Dragonstone. I saw it when I was there." All eyes turned to Stannis. The king's jaw tightened. "Then we mine it, every piece." Robb stepped forward. "And we send ravens to every house in the north, to the Vale, even to the Riverlands." Stannis frowned slightly. "You would warn them?" "I would prepare them," Robb answered. "If we stand alone, we fall alone." The room fell quiet. Robb continued, his voice steady. "The North remembers. But now the South must remember too. This is not a northern war." Stannis studied him for a long moment. "You speak like a king." Robb didn't reply. That night, Robb sat alone in his chamber. For the first time since the war began, doubt crept into his mind. He saw the Night King's eyes again. Cold, empty, certain. How do you defeat something that does not fear death? A soft knock came at the door. Catelyn entered. She had traveled north once, she heard of Hardhome. She looked tired but strong as ever. "You blame yourself," she said gently. "I chose to retreat," Robb said. "Thousands died, and thousands lied, and thousands live because of you," she answered. Robb looked up at her. Father would have stayed. Catelyn stepped closer. Your father was honorable, but sometimes honor can blind a man. Her voice softened. You saw the truth. You chose survival over pride. That is strength, not weakness. Robb was silent. You carry Ned's heart, she said, but you also carry mine. You know when to hold the sword and when to step back. The next morning, ravens flew in every direction, to Winterfell, to the Vale, to River Run, even to King's Landing. In the capital, Tywin Lannister read Robb Stark's message. He expected threats. Instead, he read a warning. The army of the dead is real. Prepare your men. Send dragon blasts. Winter is coming for us all. Cersei scoffed when she heard it. He tries to frighten us. Tywin did not laugh. He does not frighten easily, Tywin said slowly. If he believes this threat is real. Tyrion leaned forward. And if it is? Tywin looked toward the window. Then the game has changed. Back at Castle Black, preparations moved quickly. Dragonglass weapons were forged day and night. Northern soldiers trained with wildlings. Old hatred slowly faded under shared fear. One evening, as Robb walked along the wall, a horn blast echoed in the distance. One long call, then two, then three. Every man froze. 3 blasts. White walkers. The sky to the north looked darker than it should. Robb climbed the highest point of the wall, and he saw it. An endless line stretching across the frozen land. Not hundreds, not thousands. The dead were marching. Jon joined him, breathing hard. They're moving faster than before. Stannis arrived moments later, his face pale but determined. They mean to test the wall, Stannis said. Robb's mind moved quickly. If they break through, they won't, Stannis said firmly. But even as he spoke, a deep, distant rumble shook the ice beneath their feet. In the far distance, a giant shape moved. Not a living giant, a dead one. Blue eyes glowing. Robb's heart pounded. The wall had stood for thousands of years, but nothing like this had ever tested it. Men below scrambled into position. Archers lined the top. Dragon blast weapons ready. The wind screamed across the frozen world. The army of the dead stopped just out of range, waiting. The Night King rode forward slowly. He looked up at the wall. Then at Robb. Even from that distance, Robb felt it again. That silent challenge. The Night King lifted his arms slightly, and the dead giant began to move toward the gate. Step, 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 step. Each footfall shook the ground. Robb drew his sword slowly. Hold the line, he commanded. His voice did not shake. The giant raised its frozen fist and brought it down toward the ancient gate. The impact thundered across the north. Cracks spread through the ice. Men screamed. The wall was being tested. And Robb Stark understood something clearly now. This was not just a battle for the north. This was the last stand of the living. The sound of the giant's fist hitting the gate echoed like thunder across the frozen land. Cracks spread through the ancient ice, thin at first, then deeper. Men stumbled as the wall trembled beneath their feet. Hold! Robb shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. Archers, fire! A storm of arrows rained down from the top of the wall. Dragon glass tips struck wights below, shattering them into still bodies again. But for everyone that fell, 3 more stepped forward. The dead giant wore a terrible broken sound and slammed its fist into the gate again. Wood splintered. Ice shattered. Jon ran to Robb's side. If that gate falls, they flood through. Robb's mind raced. The wall was strong, but the gate was always its weakest point. Bring the oil, Robb commanded. Pour it over the gate. Barrels, were rolled forward quickly. Black oil spilled down the front of the gate, covering the giant's frozen arms, and the whites climbing over each other below. Stannis stepped forward, his sword glowing faintly red in the cold air. "Light it," Stannis ordered. A flaming arrow flew. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, fire exploded upward. The oil ignited in a roaring wall of flame. The giant staggered back, its icy skin cracking under heat. Whites burned and collapsed, their bodies feeding the fire. Cheers erupted from the wall. But Robb did not cheer. Through the flames, he saw him again, the Night King, watching, calmly, waiting. The fire burned bright, but slowly the flames began to weaken. The giant, though badly burned, still moved, and then something impossible happened. The Night King raised both arms. The wind stopped. The flames flickered violently. And then the fire died, just like that, as if the cold itself swallowed it whole. Wave of fear moved across the wall. "He controls the cold," Sam whispered. The giant charged again. With one final massive blow, the gate shattered inward. The wall still stood tall, but the entrance was open. Whites flooded through the broken gate like a dark river. "Fall back to the inner lines," Robb commanded instantly. Northern soldiers retreated in formation, shields locked. Wildlings fought beside them fiercely. Dragon blast axes swung, swords shattered bone. But there were too many. The dead giant forced its way inside, smashing men aside. Jon ran forward at the dragon blast spear. He leapt onto fallen rubble and drove the spear deep into the giant's eye. The creature froze for a second, then collapsed like a broken tower. A small victory, but the army kept coming. Robb cut down white after white, grey wind tearing through legs and arms beside him. Blood black and frozen covered the snow. Then the air grew colder again, unnaturally cold. The fighting slowed, and a path began to open through the army of the dead. The Night King walked forward, not rushed, not afraid, each step silent. Men hesitated. Even brave northern warriors stepped back. Robb felt his heart pounding in his chest, but he did not move. This was the moment. Jon stepped beside him. "You don't have to do this alone," Jon said. Robb gave him a small nod. The Night King stopped just 20 steps away, blue eyes locked on Robb. There were no words, only understanding. The Night King raised an icy blade. Robb tightened his grip on his sword. "Together," Robb said quietly. They charged. Steel met ice with a scream of metal. Jon attacked from one side, Robb from the other. The Night King moved faster than any man should. His blade knocked Jon aside, sending him crashing into snow. Robb stepped in, striking hard. The blades clashed again. Frost crawled up Robb's sword instantly, biting into the metal. The Night King pushed him back with unnatural strength. Robb stumbled but did not fall. He remembered his father's lessons. Stay calm. Wait for the mistake. The Night King swung again. Robb barely blocked it. Cold shot through his arm like poison. Then Jon rose behind the Night King and stabbed forward, but the blade missed. The Night King turned and threw Jon aside violently. Robb saw the opening. Just 1 second. He charged with everything he had left and drove his Valyrian steel sword straight into the Night King's chest. For a moment, silence. The blue eyes widened slightly. Cracks of light spread across the Night King's body. And then he shattered, like ice breaking under sunlight. All across the battlefield, whites froze, then collapsed. An endless army falling still. The wind returned slowly. Men stood frozen in disbelief. It was over. The dead lay silent. Robb dropped to one knee, breathing hard. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from release. Jon walked toward him slowly. "You did it," Jon said. Robb looked around at the fallen soldiers, the broken gate, the shattered ice. "No," Robb said quietly. "We did. Stannis approached, his face pale but steady. "The realm owes you its life," he said. Robb shook his head slightly. "The realm owes every man who stood here." Snow began to fall gently. Not violent, not cruel, just snow. Winter was still there, but death no longer marched with it. Months later, peace slowly returned. The north rebuilt, the walls repaired stronger than before. Stannis would take the Iron Throne after the weakened Lannisters fell, but he would never forget who saved the realm. And in Winterfell, banners flew proudly once more. Robb Stark stood in the courtyard where he once trained as a boy. He had started the war as the young wolf. He ended it as something greater. Not just a king, not just a warrior, but a protector of the living. He carried Ned's honor. He carried Catelyn's wisdom. And because of that, the North stood, and it would always remember